Fallon-Bourne, Dr. Lucy Fallon-Bourne, who will outline DPER's role so far in driving RPA and talk to the mandate around RPA in the Irish Public Service. So we're going to hand over to Lucy. Okay, Lucy, we can hear you now.
Great. Thank you very much, Philip. And just say good morning to you all. And thank you very much for all of you joining this RPA seminar in such great numbers. And we're delighted to have you all with us this morning. And hopefully the aim of the event is to, I suppose, to help you and to show you how we can use robotic process automation so readily to manage a lot of the processes that we are grappling with in our civil and public service. And the first thing I might say to you is that, as you know, this particular emergency or this crisis has emerged, one of the things that has become clear to us is that there's a huge explosion of the take-up of robotic process automation, because it seems to be something that is one of the ways in which we can respond efficiently and quickly to the crisis. So thanks to Philip and John for organising the seminar. And I will just give you a very brief background of where this sits and the context for this in our public service. So first of all, we've been working on this, I suppose, now, Philip, for about 4 or 5 years. And, you know, we're well up and running at this stage. And the background to it is that from 2016, we were very much conscious of the fact that new technologies such as RPA had great potential in the civil and public service to, I suppose, to help us to be more efficient and effective and to use technology to automate many of our processes. Even to this day, a lot of our processes are quite manual, and they have quite a lot of opportunity, and there's quite a lot of potential for, you know, automating the processes. So there has been a noticeable reversal in the trends in the public service from outsourcing. So we thought maybe from the point of view of cost savings, but also from the point of view of efficiency, and equally then from the point of view of our staff, just to make sure that our staff, you know, to give them meaningful value-added jobs to do, because some of those processes that the RPA replaces can be quite routine, and, you know, they can be quite boring on a day-to-day basis for some of our staff. So, and we're very much supporting the digital agenda as well. So we started a pilot, and we invited public service bodies to come on board, and we were delighted with the response. We got responses from the revenue commissioners, and they have really now come on board in terms of embedding RPA in many of their processes, and they're developing that all the time. Then we worked very strongly, of course, with the NSSO, the National Shared Service Office, and they found RPA very useful, and they have a centre of excellence there now as well. We also worked with the Road Safety Authority, and well into the pilot then, we did quite a piece of work with the housing assistance payment, which was a relatively new payment in the last number of years, and that has been a great assistance as the applications for that particular support exploded. And now we're also working with the HSE and with the Health Business Services, and we're delighted to have you with us here today as well, just to talk to us about how this is helping you in delivering your services, and particularly now in the time of the current crisis that we're in. So the outcome of the pilot was actually quite, we were quite happy with it, considering it was just, I think, for just 1 year. After 12 months, we had set up 24 processes across those organisations, and they were either completed or in the final stages. And all of them found that it improved their processes dramatically, and there was great enthusiasm in those areas who undertook this. And we had great return on investment as well. Even at that early stage with that small pilot number, we had well over 100,000 in terms of cost savings. So there was a great improvement in the processing time, and the processes improved quite as fast. But I suppose two things emerged that I suppose we weren't expecting to the degree that we found. One of them was that the quality of the processes improved dramatically. And the second one was that, you know, because it is, these are robotic processes, the actual accuracy, the elimination of human error was quite an important finding for us as well. Now, of course, in all these things, there are workarounds and there are exceptions. And, you know, we worked at those, but we're trying to eliminate those as much as we can. And then we at the end of that pilot, then we developed, we had those pilots, you know, to showcase across the civil and public service. And I want to thank those pilot organisations in particular, because they showed up first and they worked along with us. And I suppose they were the lead in terms of leading this across the civil and public service. And we trained up people on that. But very importantly then, we moved on very quickly this year to developing a framework with the OGP. Now, that was a very big development. And I think what we found, in fairness, in February and March of this year, it was really great that we had that framework in place, because now we have opened it up to the entire civil and public service. So that framework is there if people want to draw down supports. The OGP framework is there, people can draw down supports and get supports directly to automate their own processes. So you'll hear more now from the practitioners about the actual detail and the kind of processes that are suitable candidates for robotic process automation. But for the right types of processes, it's really, really super. And I think one of the ways of approaching it is to look at, you know, to investigate your processes. But also, one of the early things that happen is that there is a kind of business process improvement that takes place before you actually go into the robotic processes. So in other words, you have to define and identify the different processes and the different stages and steps along a particular service. So there are a lot of, as I said, there are a lot of benefits. So the speakers today now will actually take you through exactly how they have done it in their organizations. And I think that's the very best way to learn how we can undertake it in our own organizations. But I suppose if you think of your own organization and you think of the service that you provide, I'm sure there are many areas that come to mind that would be suitable for this kind of solution. So what we'll do then is just, we'll outline there, and Philip and John will take you through how we can support you in this, and particularly lead you to the framework and the supports that we have in place. And also, I suppose the general areas for consideration are, when you undertake this, I suppose it's important to know we in Deeper, in the reform area, and the management board in Deeper are very, very supportive of this, and we're very anxious that as many people as possible come on board. It is a very stated aim of our Public Service 2020, and I have been telling our management board and I've been telling our Secretary General about the work that we're doing in the crisis in robotic process automation, and he's very happy to know that this is happening and for other people to take this on board. I think one of the things we're seeing in the crisis is that, you know, we have made dramatic changes across the civil and public service almost overnight, and there will probably be no going back. So I think, as Robert says, we'll have no excuse now but for digitalization and using emerging technologies to help us in delivering our services better. We also just want to assure you that we have kept the trade unions briefed all along, and we've been talking to General Counsel, and we have been in touch with the trade unions on the basis that I suppose there are a lot of myths about RPA, one of them being that it replaces jobs. Really what we're finding in the civil service is that it allows staff to work on higher value added and more interesting work, because we have a lot of services to deliver and we have a lot of challenges, and it frees up those staff to do much more meaningful and much more purposeful work, and the staff actually like it, and I think the trade unions are aware of that. And of course, it's not the panacea for everything, but it is an important area to look at. So what I would suggest is that, you know, if you are to undertake RTA, you talk to us, you talk to some of the practitioners who are speaking here today, and you just learn about the process. You will need, I suppose, to learn about it, but you'll also need to work with the business areas of your organisation, because obviously the business areas have to be fully on board and accept that there will be an investment in training and in people, and obviously the communication with your organisation, with your management role is really very, very important. So we have, I think Philip will talk to you about this also, but we have a robotic process automation network, and I think people have found that very, very helpful, because people share experiences and they share their problems. And sometimes when you're working on something like that in your own organization and you come across an issue, it's great to have a place to come to share common problems. And John and Philip are a super team all together, and they're available at the end of the phone if you need any support or any help as well. So we have just a couple of examples from more recent times that you might be interested in. One of them is we've been working, believe it or not, with the Mater Hospital in relation to the COVID-19 testing. So we're right in there in the Mater Hospital, and then we're working with other hospitals to roll this out. And one of the things that the RPA can do is it can communicate back to patients whether they're positive or negative, and that's the joy of it. I mean, it's great. It can do that very efficiently and very, very quickly. And we're aiming to work with the HSE to roll that out more widely, and particularly as we go into this, I suppose, more critical phase now of the stabilization process in this crisis. It is all about the testing, and it's all about the testing and the tracking, and then isolation and so on. Secondly, then, as you know, the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection have an enormous challenge on their hands at the moment, and they have really scaled up dramatically. I doubt there's any organisation in the world that could have delivered so much so quickly in such a short time. And they're working with this now on quite a number of processes that can help them with the applications, and with also moving into the more steady state situation as we kind of, I suppose, move into the more regular payments and the regular welfare support. And then, of course, we have Deloitte, are one of our partners in the framework. And Deloitte, I have to thank you. You've done great work with us and on a pro bono basis, and so have UiPath. So, we're very grateful to you, because much of the work that you have done in this crisis has been on a pro bono basis, and I think that has shown great support between the private and the public sector. So I know Deloitte and ourselves are working with the Health Protection Surveillance Centre, again, to help with the processing and the management of an enormous amount of data that's coming in there on a daily basis in terms of the COVID numbers, the numbers across the board in relation to the crisis that we hear every day. And just related to this is, as you know, we have an open data portal that we manage in DASP, and there's an extraordinary amount of data up on that portal relating to the crisis. I think there's been a massive increase in the downloading of data from our open data portal in the last 2 months, and 30% of it relates to COVID-related downloads, and a huge increase in the people logging onto the site. So these things now have really come into their own in the crisis, and we're delighted to say that. So again, I just want to say thank you to Deloitte and others speaking to me today, and thank you to your UiPath, who have worked with us and worked with the civil and public service staff in terms of rolling out RPA and as part of their license offering. So we're delighted with you. A very big thanks to yourselves. So I think, Philip, unless you want to add to anything else I have said, that's just the general background to remind you that the supports are there for you, that this is very much supported it's very embedded as part of our reform efforts, both in the civil service and the public service as part of civil service renewal, but equally as part of our public service 2020. And I can assure you that the next phase of both of those programs is that we will have our public service 2030. We're beginning to consider that now, and this again will be an important part of it, no doubt. And equally then on the civil service 2030, this will be an important part of it, because anything that we can do to exploit the great benefits and the great opportunities from the emerging technologies will be of great benefit to us in developing our services and providing a good service to our citizens. So thank you very much for now. I don't think we can hear you, Philip.
Okay, so we're now going to hear from Tim and Louise from Deloitte. These are our implementation partners. So Tim, if you'd like to share your screen there, and Louise, we'll unmute you. So, okay, here we go.
I'll just have to see. Am I unmuted here?
You are, Tim.
Perfect. I couldn't find the unmute button. But thank you very much, Philip. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Tim. I work in Deloitte's Robotics and Cognitive Automation team. And I'd like to quickly give you an overview here of what is actually robotics process automation. I know there was a poll just before, and I'm not sure what the results are, but at least I'll make sure that after this, we're all up to the same understanding of what RPA actually is. We'll give you a bit of information on what do you actually need to do to find the right processes to then automate using this tool. Show you some of the trends and lessons learned that we have from actually working with the public sector on implementation of RPA, as well as show you how can this framework actually help, what are the offerings within there that can help you. So to start off with here, I just want to clear the most common misconception there is around robotics process automation. Because it's called robotics, people think about these physical robots. There are none of those when we talk RPA. Robotics process automation is only software. So that naturally sets a bit of limitations to what can the robots do, but also enables them to do a lot of things. And in order to, as efficiently as possible, try and explain what exactly is it, I'd like to give you a possible definition of the word robotics process automation. And the way we typically define it is that it's an enterprise software tool which automates business processes by mimicking human behavior across systems. And there's quite a lot of information in that definition. So to try and take it from the very end to the start, first of all, it's across systems. So it means this is not just automation of a particular piece of software. If you have a process where you are using SAP, you are using a Microsoft Dynamics CRM system, you're going on to external web pages even, those kind of processes that move across systems, robotics process automation can take care of those processes across all of the systems. So it can move between them and do whatever actions are needed. And the way it does that is actually by mimicking human behavior. So what that means is when you are reading a particular field in an application, you're clicking a particular button, that is exactly what we tell the robot to do as well. So this is not necessarily about trying to do advanced back-end integrations and do big IT projects. Telling a robot to mimic exactly what you do, which makes it much easier to understand how the robot actually operates. And I think the last important point that is in this definition is that it's an enterprise software tool. So that means this is not like building macros, which people would have done a lot, where we essentially have the possibility to create a shadow IT where we don't really have control of how many macros we have, what exactly they do, who's operating them. This is an opportunity to get a software tool that across the enterprise keeps track of everything. So it'll understand who's actually developing robots, where are they being deployed, exactly what are they doing at what time, so that you have full control of that. So what can that actually give you in terms of benefits? There's first of all the quality side of that. So one thing is that we can often, to a high degree, improve the experience that we give both to our co-workers, but also to citizens in this case. So there's often, as it was mentioned previously as well, there can be processes that are really tedious that, it has to be carried out, but no one really wants to do it. And often those are the kind of tasks that are very error prone because they're the ones that tend to be done. They're very repetitive and they'll be done very fast. So if we can actually automate those processes and move them away from the employees, we can improve their satisfaction with their job. At the same time, we can improve the experience of the citizens by making sure that this is handled automatically as fast as possible without relying on any human intervention. There's a security piece as well, which is that, first of all, we make sure that no humans have interaction. So it could be that we have a process that includes very sensitive data. And in those cases, handing it over to a robot can give it much more security, because we make sure that no one is taking notes while performing the process, and that would cause any personal identifiable data to be typed down on pieces of paper that are not being shredded and so on. And in that sense, we can increase the security level. Also, the traceability of it is quite important, because one thing is we can understand, because it is an enterprise-ready software, we can understand who has been automating processes and make sure that we have the right deployment pipeline. But also we can look into what is exactly the decisions that a robot has made during its processing, which means if we're suddenly getting a question on why did we make this particular decision while processing this particular case half a year ago, and we go ask a human, typically they will have forgotten about it. The robot, on the other hand, will have recorded exactly why it made that particular decision. There is also the benefit of having 24/7 operation. So we can see this as kind of the robot is a virtual worker. So it mimics our behavior and does what we would previously have done. But one thing is that it does it faster. Another thing is that it can actually do it 24/7. So it doesn't need to sleep. It also doesn't need to go to the toilet or grab a cup of coffee. So apart from quality, there's also a quantity aspect of the benefits to this, which first of all is if we have huge backlogs, which often happens, we have huge volumes coming in and we can't keep up, those backlogs end up getting bigger and bigger. We can actually deploy robots to go in and reduce those backlogs and help us getting through the work. Also, the quality and accuracy of doing it. A robot can essentially not make a mistake. The mistake will always be human. So the robot does exactly what we've told it to do. Naturally, if we tell it to do the wrong thing, it can make a mistake in that sense, but it's still us that have made the mistake. If we tell the robot to do the right thing, it will always keep doing that, which gives us that consistency. It doesn't get tired and suddenly starts going through loopholes to try and make the process easier and then make mistakes. The scalability as well means that as soon as we have a process that's automated with RPA, we can essentially turn on more robots. So a robot can run 24/7 and do that at high speed. But if suddenly we see so much volume that we need more than one robot to do it, we can essentially just make the robot replicate, and it will then do things twice as fast because it can work on it in two places at the same time. And lastly, as it mentions here, speed, which is literally just down to the way that we read information, we interpret it, we click buttons. It can do that much faster than we can do. So typically what we see is the only limitation to how fast we can process is actually the speed of the applications that we're working in. So the robot is able to do most things quite instantly. But if we have a system that it has to get around in that's very slow, that will be what slows down the robot. So generally, we see that we can save about 66% of the processing time. So essentially, the robot is 3 times as fast as a human. That would be the general observation. So moving on then to which factors do we have to keep in mind to actually choose the right processes to automate? And first of all, there are 2 points that are prerequisites. The first one is that it has to be a digital process. So as I mentioned earlier, there are no physical robots here. It's merely software. And that means that if you have physical paper that has to be printed, that is not something that the robot can do. If we need to physically pick up the phone and call someone, that is also not something a robot can do. But what it can do is handle everything that goes on the computer, which would be handling files going through your systems. The other thing is that it has to be rules-based. So the cognitive abilities that we have as humans are not something that's built into these RPA tools. You can get add-ons to them that give them those cognitive abilities, but an RPA tool in itself is what we can call an unintelligent robot. So what that means is that when we're looking at processes that we'd like to automate, we need to make sure that all of the decisions that are made during that process, that we can actually very specifically write those rules down so that we can communicate those to the robot. There are then, apart from these very hard prerequisites to what can we automate, there are some factors to keep in mind in trying to make sure that the case in automating a particular process is as good as possible. And one thing is looking at very high volume. So essentially what that is showing here is a lot of time spent, essentially. So it's high volume or a lot of time spent on the particular cases. So typically what you'll see is, if it could be low volume, but a very time intensive process. But the very typical, very low hanging fruit is really high volume. And then it doesn't depend as much on what time does it take per case, but what you'll be looking at is the overall time that you spent on that particular type of processing. The other thing is the low variability, which essentially means we can always see a process as having a motorway down the middle. So there's a main way going from the start to the end of a process. And that will always have a number of exceptions. It will branch out. In a particular case, the data looks like this, and we go another way in the process. So the processes that are best for automations are the ones that don't have a lot of these exceptions. As we'll get back to in the presentation a bit later, it doesn't matter that there's actually those exceptions, because the robot can handle that human interaction and make sure it hands over work to us. But as a general rule of thumb, the low variability means an even better case for automating. And then lastly, if it's a very error-prone process, if it's a process where we see a lot of human error, that is often where we can get a lot of benefit out of using robots. Because as I mentioned, the robot only does exactly what we told it to. So we know that it can actually eliminate those human errors. So the last thing I will do tell you here before handing over to my colleague Louise is that the traditional way of thinking of this is often that we do exactly as we've done as humans. We tell the robot to mimic us precisely, which is a great thing that allows us to automate a lot of transactional processes, everything that we sit and do every single day as humans. But what robotics process automation is also able to do is actually enable us to do the things that we were not even able to do as humans before. So that opens up a lot of new use cases. That could, for example, be what we call lightweight integration. So a good example of that would be want to deploy a new smartphone app that can do something for our citizens. And in order to do that, we need that app to have access to the data that we have in our core system. Typically, what that means is building a heavy IT integration from that app into our backend systems. But here, RPA can actually help working as that integration. So essentially what we can do is have an app look at what is happening in the app, and it will then go into the backend systems and retrieve all the information that's necessary and present that in the app again, which is a really strong use case. Another thing is data quality and cleaning. So often what is not being done is naturally to look into our systems and look at the overall data quality and constantly clean that out. We might do that with certain numbers of cases within our systems, but it's simply not humanly possible to go through all data that we have and try and clean that out. That's another place where RPA can help us do something that we were not able to do before. So simply we can ask it to go through, that could be all the citizen information we have in a particular system, check the quality of that and help us improve on that as well. And the last example I'll give here is around compliance checks. So that would be similar to data quality and cleaning, that often we do compliance checks on certain amounts of cases we have coming through. But essentially, if we automate that, the robot doesn't care if it has to do a batch of 10 per month or whether it has to do the whole thing, everything that comes in, because it has that full scalability. So that allows us to again, do something that we were simply not able to do before, instead of only mimicking what the human does. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Louise McEntee.
Thanks, Tim. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to Lucy, Philip and John for organising the session this morning. We know how much work went into this, but we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to such a broad spectrum of people across the public sector on this morning. So I might just introduce myself. My name is Louise McEntee. I am lead Deloitte's Robotic and Intelligent Automation team with a particular focus on the public sector. So I've had the pleasure of working with a number of the presenters today over the past number of months in terms of helping as an implementation partner across the RPA framework that Philip and Derek have set up. I suppose we want to do a couple of things. I mean, we've walked through what RPA is, how do you identify a good process, but I suppose we wanted to take you through some of the trends that we've seen, because there have been some lessons learned over the past few months. And also with Deloitte, we have quite access to a lot of automation work that's happening globally, and we're starting to see trends emerge there and things that we can learn from and apply here in the public sector. So I suppose to date, or prior to this, and I would say a caveat, this is probably prior to the crisis, and there's a lot of this information, but we have seen a heavy focus on proofs of concept. I suppose people were very concerned about could this work, and the focus had been oftentimes on the technical part of could this work and could this function, and how do you get this software to operate within your organization, rather than necessarily on the bigger question of the change management and the people and process implications of what you're using automation for. And I suppose that's something that has been a challenge, because people didn't necessarily engage across their businesses and start to bring both tech perspective and the business perspective together to think about their automation challenges. The other thing that we've seen quite broadly was there are quite decentralized approaches happening across organizations in terms of their approach to RPA. Because they're testing or they're focusing on proofs of concept, they tend to try and test across lots of multiple diverse different business functions, and you end up with quite siloed activity in terms of RPA rather than one consolidated, considered approach across the whole organization. Again, I suppose it's part of the evolution as well and the maturity of organizations in terms of considering automation and how they will use it. I think previously as well, and Tim's alluded to some of these points, the focus initially was very much for particularly, let's say, business organizations, business services, shared services, on cost reduction or efficiency only. But I suppose what they hadn't done was consider the broader implications or the broader benefits that RPA could bring, particularly around quality, around the employee experience, around the customer experience, around security, control, and the ability to audit information, and also as well the quantity. So how it can help you in tackling immediate point in time challenges around backlogs of work, or improving the quality and accuracy of your data processing, or even the turnaround times in terms of engaging with citizens or with your colleagues in turn. So we'd also seen an awful lot of instances of trying this before they really consider getting into an implementation and automation, because there are a huge variety of vendors around automation. Lots of people have tried different tactics and different partners in this, and again, it reinforced that challenge of having siloed different approaches across the organization, and it limited really organizations' ability to really get the benefit of their automation and their spend on automation, because they struggled to scale then when you had pockets of different activity happening all over the place. But I suppose we are all equally starting to see where it is really working for organizations, and the best organizations really are starting to move into that space of thinking, how will this work for our whole organization? So thinking through their overall automation op model for an organization, and also their strategy for doing that. And I know David and from the NSSO and Kevin from the HBS will take you through their experience on that, but they're starting to think in the broadest sense, how do we create an RPA capability for an organization, and how do we consistently deliver and bring that to our business across the whole of the organization consistently? Equally, how do they consider the business case for this, and how do they really leverage that spend that they're making, or that investment they're making in automation, and really leveraging it to utilize the licenses or the bots that they do spin up in the best possible way? I think the way they're doing that in practical terms is by establishing a centralized place or a center of excellence to really drive automation across organizations, and we see this globally. Those who really focus on building a central capability and investing in their own people to learn about the concepts of automation and also to drive the activity, see much better outcomes in terms of their automations, and also see much better utilization of the infrastructure that they do stand up. We also see as well that they start to then consider automation as a core tool in moving on a digital transformation journey, as opposed to an end in itself. So it's something that as you build the capability, certainly you see it become more embedded in programs across the whole organization. The other piece as well is, I suppose people are now starting to view RPA as just another component of your workforce. So that concept of the bot or the software being an additional digital worker is being explored in a lot more detail in the organizations that are really getting the benefit of this. So they're considering not necessarily just how they could replicate how their teams do this, but actually how they could bring the people and the automation together to actually fundamentally change how they deliver their processes and just do things differently. So to Tim's point around the lightweight integrations, you're not talking wholesale system change. What you're thinking about is, how do I let the bot do the very simple things that I can tell it to do, allow my team to integrate and interact with it, and then really take on more complex processes. And I suppose that's something certainly we've seen working over the last number of weeks with our partners in the public sector in their response to the crisis. It's not always straightforward to bring in an automation. You want the robot to do the simple things, and you want your people to be able to guide it and to take decisions where needed and required. And I suppose that's a way to really get the benefit of that spend as well. The other piece then I suppose we're seeing is upfront, and it's related to the strategy point, but they're also thinking, defining their approach upfront. So in terms of selecting one partner or one vendor, and that's not always easy, and certainly you'll use your proofs of concepts or your pilots to test those things out, but they're certainly starting to think beyond one automation or 5 automations, where might this go as an organization, and thinking through what sort of infrastructure they might need, and maybe starting with something in mind, rather than knowing fully where you're going to go, but at least having some vision of that North Star as to what you'd like to create for the organization. The other piece is being very clear and having a set approach and clear standards as to how you would implement automation. And I suppose all of the pieces we've talked about above around the strategy, around having centralized capability around RPA, and really allowing this to be driven by your business means you bring that consistency. So you have a team with the skills who can then be evangelists out in your organization and talk about what RPA can do, but also then can back that up with it. Well, okay, let's go on that journey together, and how will we implement this and do that consistently as well. So I suppose there are a few steps in terms of how you go about implementing an organization, and a lot of you will still be at that stage of just becoming aware of automation and what the possibility or the capability is for your organization. And I think the work that's already been done on the framework in terms of the proofs of concepts with the NSSO, with the HBS, with and other organizations have proved that this can work and it can really deliver benefits. So I suppose that from there, we're really trying to help people step into the sort of production pilot mode. So rather than coming up with a proof of value or proof of concept, we're saying, well, let's explore this on a tangible, a real business problem that you have, and let's see, can we automate that and do it iteratively, do it quickly, but more critically, do that with your business SMEs and your tech organization on board to say, okay, we're going to agree this, we're going to review our process, we're going to redesign it where necessary, we're going to agree how we can automate that, but we're also going to go to the point where we're ready to actually use this within our organization, rather than park it as a proof of concept and say that works. That works. I suppose the key thing, however, is that we don't want people to get stuck at that point. So while you are investigating those pieces, you should be starting to think, okay, I've got one process, I've got one bot stood up, but actually I now see that this process that I've automated is maybe only using 5 or 10% of the capacity of that bot. So we're always encouraging people to start to think, well, what else could we do, and how do we really get the benefit of any investment, both of people, of their time, of their expertise, and also of the spend that you're going to put into, drawing down some of these licenses. I think critically as well, I suppose having that dedicated team in the center lets people start to think, what are the next processes you might like to automate? Because I think, and David and Kevin will certainly speak to this, the people who do go down this path do not go back. They start immediately thinking of all the other things that they could automate and that they want to automate, and I suppose to make sure to capture that while it's fresh in their mind, and also that they're going to get the benefit of the spend up front. So I suppose beyond that, then really you are trying to build as an organization and try to scale that operation as well. And that's probably quite an aspirational number of 50 plus bots there, but the bigger organizations that we're seeing certainly are going that route, and what they're trying to do is really fundamentally understand how they will go from the 1, 2, 3 pilots that they've kicked off, and really build that as a capability as one of their key tools in their digital transformation tool set. I suppose critical to that, though, again, is that this is business-led, and that the SMEs from across your business are the ones who are bringing the opportunities and the ideas, and that it is enabled by the IT team, and that you're working together in partnership. Because I suppose that's certainly what we've been learning over the last number of months, is that joint working, that partnership and that engagement is how you get the best projects that deliver the best outcomes, and that really can be implemented and stick. Don't just sit as a project that has been delivered and everybody said wasn't that great. It actually fundamentally changes how they're delivering. And that's when you're moving into that ingrained space, that you're starting to be an automated organization that's really getting the benefit of their investment. So there are certainly some lessons learned over the last number of years, months, and particularly over the last few months for us as a local team. We've been working a lot more with our partners, and we're starting to see the things that really do work. And I suppose the centralist team, certainly, definitely building that expertise. And I know that's a fundamental to the work that Philip and Derek have done on the framework to date. You know, there is, you know, they want to see the point-in-time automations, but much more importantly, what they want to see is this capability built across the public sector and across each of your organizations, so that you get the benefit of any investment that you make up front now. You're bringing your teams with you, but you're also building a central capability within each organization who can really drive progress towards automation and can also be the experts. So you will have evangelists across the business who can identify processes and who will know what they want to do, but then you need to be able to back that up with the people who can help them do it and can do it in such a way that it can be actively managed and controlled across the organization. I think the other key thing that we're seeing is these teams work best when you have that mix of business, SME and tech, but also when you've got very solution orientated or quite innovative people who are thinking not necessarily how is it done today, but how could it be done? And they're quite open to that. So yes, they're very detailed individuals that go all the way down to almost to a keystroke level of understanding a process, but they also have that eye on, well, how could we do this differently? And bringing those groups together from across the business, as in the real process experts, but also the tech teams, are really a good mix to make sure that you're starting to implement effectively. In terms of the thing that we do really try and encourage is that people don't underestimate the change management impact of this. So just building the automation will not make your teams change their behavior on the ground. So I suppose doing that upfront engagement with the process owner, with the business owner, can really let them think through, okay, I see what the robot can do. I now need to understand how best to integrate that with the work of my teams, so that they also get the benefit of this, but also that they really don't go back and they really genuinely change their behavior. And I suppose that needs to be thought through right from the outset in terms of engaging as well with the key stakeholders. I suppose the people who could potentially block these automations or who might be reluctant or think it's too risky, getting them on board from the outset, particularly IT, in terms of engaging with them on what you're doing, how you're going to do it, and reassuring them that there's nothing here that is going to be damaging to your organization. I suppose that leads straight into testing a robot. I suppose is no riskier than bringing a new member into your team. To Tim's point from earlier, the robot can only do what we ask it to do. Now, sometimes we might make mistakes in how we queue that up, but in reality, that really isn't much different than trying to bring a new member onto your team and teach them how to do the work. So I suppose it's worth taking that risk. The worst they can do is make the same mistake that a new member on your team might do. You will be able to control it, you'll be able to audit it, you'll be able to find out what went wrong and address it in those cases. In terms of the last 2 points are a bit more on maybe evolving this. So beyond the manual and trying to consider, you know, the very simple processes you could automate, we are certainly starting to see that those who are getting the benefit out of their automation are starting to consider more complex processes and using exceptions. So you use the robot and teach them how to do the simple things. Where it needs an intervention from a person, you can build that into how you design your process. So for example, we've been talking about some OCR automations with a couple of the clients where the robot will read 95% of what is on the page, but where it's in doubt, it will come out and ask a person to verify what that information is. And I suppose that has twofold benefit. You can automate an awful lot more of your process, but you can also have that reassurance of knowing that where there's a doubt or where there's a concern or where the robot cannot deal with something in a straightforward way, your teams are able to validate and verify the information that's there. And I suppose that brings a whole other suite of opportunity in terms of what people can do in the automation space and really allow people to explore what's the art of the possible here. And I think the more that people understand that concept, people will definitely start to come with more and more ideas as well. And then what it will mean is that you get the benefit of those 1, 2, 3 bots that you're maybe stood up, and you'll start to see that the utilization will be driving higher and higher, and you'll get even more return on your investment. The last piece then as well is back to some of Tim's points around macros and local desktop automation. So we do see a lot of people take on and automate something locally on their machine. It's faster, it is much quicker. You can do recordings and just replicate what you see in front of you. But I suppose for something that can really bring benefit to your organization and can be audited and controlled, RPA and the wider setup of having using the software is certainly something that can deliver an awful lot more change. What it also means is if there are application changes or there are things that your IT team change in the background, it's very, very difficult to control that if you've set up all your automation separately on different desktops, or you've multiple people across an organization who are involved in the design of those and would have to be involved in dealing with any changes. If you are going the RPA route and having a centralized team with oversight and control of what you're doing, it means you really can manage those challenges much better and make sure that you're not breaking the robots that you've written in essence or designed prior to that. So I suppose that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of the trends that we're seeing and the lessons we've learned over the last while. I think the key thing is under the framework, there are a number of services. The Deloitte team are available certainly to help you work through which are the right processes to focus on in the first place. But we're also there to try and help and develop your teams as well. So, I mean, the project, and I hope Kevin will speak to this later, but when we do kick off any project, it is very much with the organization to try and get them to help to, number one, understand how to identify a process, but also then how do I deliver this? How do I go from understanding my process to designing the future design, and also implementing this, and also how do we manage and maintain this going forward? So under the framework, there is project delivery, but there's also training and supports for you in terms of learning and developing your staff. And then there are other services under the organization, ongoing support, etc. But there's lots of information on the website. I know John has tons of information that he will share, and no doubt we'll share the links with you later. But I think the key thing is come and talk to us. We're here to help. I can't stress that too much. John and Philip are obviously the core people to go to in the first instance, but please don't be afraid to come and talk to us about any ideas that you might have around automation. And with that, I will hand back to you, Philip. I know we're probably going to David next, are we?
Yep, thanks a million, Louise. Okay, so we're going to hand over to David Smith, and David is the RPA manager in the National Shared Services Office, and he operates one of the two Centre of Excellences that are going on in the civil service, the other one being in the Revenue Commissioners. And I know Irene and Jonathan are there in with us today, so they can certainly chat away in the chat function there. But David, if you're ready to go, I'll just unmute you there. So.
Yep. Thanks very much, Philip. So, Fortress, as Philip was saying, my name is David. I'm from the National Shared Services Office. So just in case no one actually knows what the National Shared Service Office is, that currently we provide HR and payroll shared services. So HR shared services transacts on behalf of 42 public bodies and has about 38,000 customers. Whereas the payroll shared section transacts for 54 public service bodies and has about 124,000 customers. When originally formed, we were under the remit of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. But in 2018, we became a standalone public service body in our own right. So I won't go into too much detail about what robotic process automation is, because Deloitte has just done that. But in short, it is basically the application of technology which allows software, i.e. the robot, to complete simple processes which are normally used by human operators. In many workplaces, people are doing work that could be automated by machines, and the NSSO is no different in that respect. The robot does specialise in repetitive, monotonous work, such as data entry and calculations, and of course this can be very prone to human error and carried out by staff. So a little bit about the team is that the RPA team started just to actually come up to close to 3 years now at this stage as part of the pilot project, and it currently consists of 4 members of staff. So all the staff actually work as business analysts, developers and testers. 2 of the staff were trained using the 9-day training course, which can be put through Deloitte now, I believe, whereas the other 2 staff were trained in-house. All staff were selected using expressions of interest. And one of the common things I'm generally asked is who suits the RPA team, so who would make, say, a good developer. What I always recommend is that you need to have officers that have a good understanding of how to analyse a process and procedures, and also the officer who's undertaking it has to understand that RPA is a continuous learning process. You might go for the training, but you're not going to know everything straight off the bat. So they have to be able to figure out how to solve problems for themselves. An RPA officer also must not be afraid to ask why. They have to be able to ask, why is the stage doing this? Why is that leading the process? Why are we doing it that way? And this is to make sure that you make the process efficient. You also need an officer not to be afraid to state concerns. The last thing in the world you want is someone spending 2, 3, 4 weeks developing a process, and just because they were too afraid to raise the red flag, it just wasted time and it never ends up in production. And you also need staff members that can take ownership of a task. Of course, it's going to be support there. Of course, people can escalate any issues. But in reality, if they're given a task, they really have to be able to run with it. But probably the most common question I'm asked is, how important is IT skills? Well, in my opinion, it depends what you mean by IT skills. Do they have to have a degree in computer science or something like that? Not in my experience, no. But you do need to have someone that has a good aptitude for IT and can pick up a piece of software and try to figure out how it works and get the best out of it. So, how does the robot work? In short, the robot behaves just like a person does. It operates a virtual mouse and keyboard. It accesses systems in the same fashion as you do. And even how do you teach a robot? You teach it the very same way you do a new member of staff. So if you think about if you had a brand new member of staff coming in, how would you train them? First, you'd probably show them what software they'd use. Then you'd show them how to complete a process where there's no exceptions. Then you teach them how to spot exceptions that could arise from a process. And finally, though, you would then teach them how to handle these exceptions. This is the very same method that we actually use when we're developing the processes and programming the robot. So what can the robot do? In simple terms, anything that is a standardized process and it can be completed using yes or no answers can be automated once the data is digitalized. Of course, yes, as Deloitte was saying earlier on, it can't interact with physical things. It is just a piece of software, so it does have to be digital data. But the robot can interact with many different pieces of software, for example, whether it's Windows or whether it's a browser or a HR system or a mainframe system. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to come across issues with certain applications. I know that we certainly have. But if you keep working through it, you will find a way around it and you will be able to get the robots to interact pretty much with anything you can throw at it. The robot can also perform calculations, it can verify data, it can send and receive emails, it can transfer data, it can manipulate data, and it can populate information. So what are some of the benefits and advantages of RPA? Because that's really why you want to bring it into your organization. In short, the robot is good at what people are bad at, which is boring, monotonous work. Whereas a person, on the other hand, is very good at thinking and trying to work at complex decisions, and that's what a person's good at, but a robot is bad at. So the robot is also very, very reliable. It can run 24/7, 365 days a year. It doesn't take annual leave, and it doesn't ring in sick. Now, of course, whether something can run 24/7 will, of course, depend on your setup, so what your IT setup is like or what your building policy be like. But in theory, you can do it. And just to give an example, as you can probably guess, I'm working from home because of COVID-19. All my staff are working from home, but the robots are running just as normal. There's no problem with them. They are running just as they would as if we're in the office, and we can use them and remote into them all from home. There is increased quality, accuracy, security, and speed. It's very, very cost effective. One of the huge benefits we discovered was that once we automated a part of a process or that process, the backlog for that just disappeared. So, of course, that there is a huge, huge benefit. Like many organizations, the NSO does have process which has quite large backlogs, so it's fantastic when you can get rid of them. Another huge benefit we have noticed is that staff can concentrate on more value-added activities. You can transfer them for the really boring, monotonous jobs to stuff which gives them far, far more fulfillment. And another one, as I said earlier on, you can control and monitor multiple processes from one machine, and depending on which way you're set up, you can do it from pretty much anywhere. However, there is limitations to the robot. The robot cannot think for itself. It does not possess human characteristics such as judgment, sympathy, mercy. It works best with yes or no answers, it truly does. It does require a process to be completely standardized, it really does. A staff member, for example, interpret a spelling mistake or format errors where the robot will act whenever it's given. And just to give an example of that, if you think of a date format, If someone was to write 02/Feb/2020 or 02-02-2020, we'd all know that's a date. But for the robot, you have to let it know what form of the date is coming in and try to stick to it. Also, it can only work as fast as your IT systems allow. In other words, if a member of staff hits save and it takes 5 seconds for the system to respond, the robot has to do that as well. And another thing that we have to try to do is we have to try to program the robot to make sure that it is always going to work even on the worst day. Not on a Friday at 6 o'clock when the building is empty, but when everyone is in the office and all the systems are being loaded to max capacity. It may be affected by software, system, and IT policy updates, and it can take a long time as well to amend a process that's already being automated. But a slight change can have a big impact for an RPA solution. It depends what it is. What cannot be automated, though, and I know I said it already, but if the information is not provided in a set format, if the process does not have well-defined rules and procedures, and if it requires an officer to make a judgment call, these just cannot be automated. So how do we select processes for automation? So, well, in short, we ask teams to make submissions, we evaluate them and create a shortlist. We determine whether processes were automated by asking questions such as, is the process standardized? How many cases are processed? How much time does it take to do each case? Is it prone to human error? And what benefit would it be to the organization? Then based on these questions, we very simply just prioritize each one and allocate each staff to them as appropriate. But throughout our time, we have made mistakes and we have learned a lot of lessons. And these are just an example of some of them, which is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, you do have to find a good process, but don't try to find an absolute perfect process. If you can't automate the entire process, maybe you can just automate part of it, but that will still have an impact on your organization. I would strongly recommend we don't start with extremely complex processes. I'd recommend you start with a smaller process, a part of a process. This will give you a quick win and will also allow your staff to get used to the software and figure out how to get the best out of it. As much as possible, don't allow scope creep. Of course, this is for any project, but like any project, if you allow scope creep to come in, your time frames are going to keep being pushed out, and you'll never actually get into production. Set realistic time frames. We've made a huge mistake starting off. We thought that we were going to be able to automate through the most complicated process we had in the space of 2 weeks. That was a huge failure. That was a mistake, but we did learn from our lessons with that. Now we do set realistic time frames. I strongly, and the organisation would also strongly recommend, use multiple subject matter experts, and also use subject matter experts across all levels. There's no point in having senior managers being a subject matter experts. You need people that are doing the cases day in, day out. They're the ones that will be able to say 1 in 10,000 times this will happen. And that's the type of thing you really want to build into your robot to make sure that it's reliable and robust. I'd also check that supposedly structured data is actually structured. I have made that mistake in the past. I just assumed it was, and I looked into it, it just wasn't, and it causes huge problems. And I'd also check to see if a process you're automating is actually a structured one, or is it in a state of flux or recently changed. If it has been, or if it's in a state of flux, wait till it's changed, wait till it's bedded in, then automate it once then, because that way all the changes have already been made. Also, probably the biggest mistake that I know of other places that I've made is do not try to fix a process through automation. It's much, much smarter, I believe, to use your robot to automate processes that are well structured and then take them resources and move over them troublesome process you're trying to get under control. The operational team and customer as well also must agree to release staff and resources to allow to test it and to be able to make sure the robot is built as required. And finally, the operational team must be able to retain the skill in case the robot can't run. If something is updated or something needs to be changed, you need the functional team to be able to take back that and be able to do that for a short period of time while you update the robot. I'm actually going to pass you over to my colleague Maciek now, who's going to finish off the rest of the presentation. Thank you.
Robotics team in NSSO. I'm going to now tell you how we engage with staff as this was very, very important, especially at the beginning of RPA in our organization. We were literally knocking from doors to doors to the team, to all the teams, and we were asking them, we were offering them the presentations, and we invite the staff at all levels. We encourage them then to review their processes and make a submissions. What we mean by review their processes, we have a different understanding of what the process is. For RPA, the process, it can be a tiny, tiny thing. It's actually a part of something bigger that can really make a big difference for the organization. And that's very important. Reassure staff that automation will not replace their job, but is there to help them by reducing pressure within the teams to basically allow them to do something much more valuable. And important is to use the staff at all levels as a subject matter expert. And my personal advice is actually to focus even more on clerical staff than people higher up. Ensure them that any questions will be happily answered by the team, and you will be there to resolve the problems and to help them. Support is very important. And of course, we also engage by demonstrations like this one and at the townhouse that we already do a good few times before. Winning the trust of the organization is very, very important. Start with something smaller, and this is what I just mentioned on my previous slide. Divide a process to small little parts and then automate it. Something which will be simple. First of all, your team will need to learn how to do it properly. Then it will be easier as well to win the trust of your organization. Ensure the robust testing procedure. The testing is very, very important here, and you can't cut the corners, because when human will make a mistake, it may make a mistake once, twice, then can do loads of the case properly. If a robot will make a mistake, it will be repeating all the time like that. That's why it's very, very, very important to give your teams enough time for testing. When in full production, request spot checks be completed by the teams, by the process owners. Have an environment where different RPM team and member can review and resolve exceptions, so share your knowledge. Require senior management to sign off on all processes. It's very simple. This is very important rule. We need to blame someone if something goes wrong. Nothing builds trust quite like thousands and thousands of error-free cases. Now, the numbers are speaking for themselves. However, please take into the account that even we're saying 2020 up to May in the last column, it's only the beginning of May, and we're actually talking about the first 4 months of 2020. When I will explain actually the names of the processes a little bit quickly. So alert sent, that's alerts you're receiving from us from time to time in relation to travel paths, to shortened working year, etc. So as you can see, altogether for the last 2 years, we sent nearly 2 million emails. And absence update case status, this is very simple. It was actually our first process live, and it's very, very simple. It's just changing status of the new cases. Absence CMO, you will, I won't say much about it, as this will be an example that I will show you on the next slide, as we have, we create the video for you of this process as an example. Exit process. And this is where what Tim mentioned before, where you have low volume. However, it's so time costing, it's so complex, it's such a big process that is actually saving more time than the other processes with triple or double or even 10 times more the cases done within the same time. This process that won't be recommended as one of your first processes. It's really big and complex. Union business leave, don't need to explain that probably. Issue new usernames. That's the process where we issue the new usernames for the new starters in the organization, in your department as well. And reset password, probably most of you already use that process even without knowing it. Payroll path, that's the process that won overall award in the NSSO Excellence and Innovation Awards last year. And this is a big credit to our colleague Enya from our team. Recruitment path, it sounds similar, but it's completely different process. That process creates a payroll amended form. This is what PATH stands for. DMS is White Search Uploads. It's a document management system. This is a very good example, opposite to Exit, where you have it's short process, big volumes, as you can see, or over 20,000 documents uploaded to document management system this year only. And update payroll numbers, that's another our process. This process will be probably retiring soon, as we only have a certain amount of numbers to update on our system. Now I'm going to show you the CMO process, which CMO stands for Chief Medical Officer. And this process, it's a very good example of a cross-systems process, like what Tim mentioned before, as this the robot will be using actually 3 different systems. It will be using human resources management system, case management system, using Excel file, okay? So what actually will be happening here, the process is slowed down for purposes of this presentation. So the robot can actually run it much faster. And the robot will gain the data from Excel spreadsheet, check an absence in the human resources management system, HRMS, and then will create a new case for the officer called Luke Skywalker, as we're using a dummy data. So please, it will take around 3 minutes. Please have a look. Robot's collecting data. Okay. Robot will log in to HRMS using its own credentials. So we always can track who actually we created and when. That will be Robo. As you can see, it's Luke Skywalker. Robot just found a correct absence.
How much has that been slowed down, Magic?
I think it's around 30–40%.
Cool.
Again, as was mentioned by our colleagues before, the robot can be only as fast as the systems, and the Oracle systems we are using are not the fastest in the world. You will see actually, because some steps will be slower than others, like so. Now a robot will be creating a case. It's exactly the same way as the officers in our office do. Right? Setting up a case, filling the field, using a template, inputting the information, using a date of absence, confirmed, because we are not using data from Excel, just in case we are comparing. Basically, the robot always do the cross-check. So the robot actually is gaining information, there is comparing to the information in the system. So we will be 100% sure that it's accurate. And it's not, it's flagged actually as an exception. Here, robot, robot just make a note, exactly the same way as officers. For the staff and auditing purposes. what was done. Yes, and that's it. And now Robo is creating a report. You are completed when, at what time, how long it takes. The report can be tailor-made, so that actually it all depends what information you may need on the report. We can add anything that robot can see across the process slide. So that was me. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here for you, and you're more than welcome. I will be happy to answer the questions on the end of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you to both Magic and Dave for that presentation. We're going to pass over now to Kevin Kelly. Kevin is from the Health Service Executives, Health Business Services. So I'm just going to hand over to you there, Kevin. And hopefully unmute.
Okay, thanks very much, Philip. Just to introduce myself, I'm Kevin Kelly. I'm the Digital Innovation Lead with Health Business Services, who are the business division of the HSE. I suppose I'm the newbie here. I've been an attendee at previous events organised by Deeper, and I think all of the speakers who have gone before me and Derek afterwards have been a huge help to us, even since the last event, to get us to the point where we now have a story to tell. So just to give you a little bit on HBS and who we are and the scale of the operation. We are 6 business units within HBS. We do procurement, finance, estates, HR. We also run the HSE's SAP Centre of Excellence, and we have a business excellence and digital innovation unit of which I'm a part. We make up about 1.5% of the total workforce in the HSE, and as you can see from the slide, our staff are widely geographically dispersed. We have a huge dependency on digital systems and technology, and this graphic here gives an indication of the scale of the operation across all of those business units. We always had a sense that, you know, from when we learned about RPA and listening, when we visited Derek and his team, or David and his team, I should say, in NSSO, and always had a sense that there was an opportunity here for us to alleviate some of the pressure on our 1,500 staff. So we commenced 2 pilot processes in December 2019 after some thought and taking advice from others who'd ventured into this territory. These weren't so much to be proofs of concept, in that the concept for RPA was well established by now, but what we needed to do, I suppose, was to gain a level of confidence in the technology, to allow us to sort of step forward boldly then with further opportunities. So we looked at 2 specific processes, one in finance and one in HR. Just on those then, the HBS finance process involves validation and reconciliation of data coming in from the acute hospitals on a daily, weekly basis. We selected this process because it was a stable and a persistent process. It had already been leaned by the subject matter expert, by the lady running the process. It wasn't all that complex a process, but very tedious, mundane and repetitive. And finance themselves were happy to present it to us to try out because it was low risk. We had good success in that. The robot was able to process a case in just over 6 minutes, where it was taking a human worker 111 minutes. But what we gained from this was far more than just the saving from the time. But you know, finance are now very confident about the technology, happy to now look at further opportunities. And I think there are many in the finance division. The process itself runs daily at 9 a.m., 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. And it only uses about 2% of the robot's time, leaving 98% of time and capacity in that robot to do other processes. The HR process was a little bit more complex and wasn't so much about trying to instill confidence in the team, but it was to meet a growing issue as a result of increased workload and reduced staffing. It was or is a stable, persistent process, so we were happy to step forward on that. But as I say, a little bit more complex than the finance process. There is an element of risk in that we're dealing with quite sensitive data, staff, employee data. But it was selected primarily because of mounting business pressures. There was two factors to that. The National Vetting Bureau Act has now introduced a need to re-vet relevant staff, and that was going to occur on a 3-year basis. So all of the staff who were relevant and needed to be vetted would have to be re-vetted every 3 years. The process itself involves taking vetting status information. So assuming the Garda Vetting Liaison Office in Manorhampton will have already processed the vetting request into An Garda Síochána, the result will have come back from the guards, and then that data needs to be sent down to our team in HR to upload into SAP, into each employee's personnel record. So this is the process that we were looking at, was the uploading of that data. But there's quite a bit of checking and cross-matching has to be done to ensure that you're updating the correct John Murphy, and there's quite a few John Murphys in the organisation. So it's a quite long and laborious task. The other mounting pressure that came and hit us right in the middle of this automation effort was COVID-19. And we were now faced with the urgent hiring of interns, medics, and student nurses. Where this process would have been done manually and would have been done once a month, we now needed to increase the frequency of that upload so that staff could be brought in much more quickly and not have to await vetting status return. The outcome of this, again, you can see that the time saving comparable to the finance saving, but what was really relevant here was the number of transactions. The robot was able to do in 10.5 hours what it was taking that team, Mary's team, 520 hours to complete. So a saving in excess of 500 hours a month. Equally pleasing was the fact that it was able to do the process with 100% accuracy. And does allow, we haven't started into the re-vetting cycle yet, we're doing in the region of 35,000 vettings per annum in the organisation. With re-vetting, we anticipate a spike over the first 2 or 3 years of that to about 80,000 per annum, and then for it to scale back down to about 55,000 per annum. So there will be a jump in terms of the activity now, COVID or notwithstanding. But when things settle down, we're still looking at having to absorb additional volumes. Mary was anticipating she's got a staff of 3 people, and she was anticipating having to hire another 4 people into that department. She won't now have to do that. So that was very much a good news story from that process, and also from the finance process. So our next step, what we had done all along here, was to move ourselves towards building self-sufficiency. And the engagement with Deloitte, I forgot to say that we engaged Deloitte through the framework, and that commenced only in December of 2019. and it landed really just in time as a consequence of COVID. So we've literally just gone live in the last 2 weeks with those two processes. We've worked with two separate teams from Deloitte on the processes simultaneously, and we've had really excellent engagement from Louise and Tim and the rest of the team. What we're doing now is moving those proven production pilots onto a far more stable server-based platform. So the Office of the CIO, or ICT and HSE, are working with us to build out that server environment, and that's actually happening as I speak. And what we want to do then is establish that center of excellence that Louise was speaking about earlier on, where we become self-sufficient to an extent, and really get to ourselves to a point where David and Matt have spoken about, where we can automate, work with the business to automate processes, and do it by ourselves, and absolutely bring in third-party expertise when we meet more complex issues. But so right now our challenge is to get those staff into place and get them trained. Our platform, we've hung our hat, I suppose, a little bit on UiPath, because of the orchestrator element and the fact that we can sweat the bot's time, and minimize the number of bot licenses that we will actually then have to buy. As I mentioned, we have a lot of capacity in the bot that was running the finance process. So if there are activities we can run at other parts of the day or through the night, that's, the orchestrator will be able to line that up for us. We've also received quite a lot of interest from other parts of the organization, from beyond HBS, and we introduced Deloitte into the mix. We've got distracted, I suppose, because of COVID, and one of the things that we've had to spin up very quickly was a CRM solution to manage the patient pathway through the COVID care channel. A lot of that data around positive patients and surveillance data has to find its way across to HPSC, and I'm sending a nightly extract, manually taking an extract from CRM and sending it across to HPSC each evening. So we're Deloitte are now working with that team in HPSC and ourselves to automate what I'm doing, take the extract and bring it across and input it into CIDR directly. So that's going to save a lot of people an awful lot of time, and ensuring accuracy and privacy and so on. So you've heard also Lucy mentioning the development underway in the Matter, and I believe that's been rolled out to other hospitals, including Tala. So there's a lot of growing interest across the HSE and RPA, and we really want to be at the centre of this for HBS and for others who want to find out about the experience we've had. Just in terms of lessons learned, and I say we're very early days on this. We're less than 5 months into the RPA journey, but certainly the advice we would have taken from the likes of David and others who have gone forward in this space, we can really echo those. Start simple. Take very safe processes. Don't try to do anything too complex from day one. Very important to work with the willing. The two business units and the teams within those business units in particular were very enthusiastic about seeing what this could do. Not that they had their minds made up in advance, but they were curious and were willing to spend the time to do that. I suppose one thing that was remarked back was they underestimated the level of time that they would need to commit to working with Deloitte. But the reason for that is because it wasn't something that was being done to them. They were actually doing it with Deloitte. So they were very much part and parcel of that journey. So I would think, I'd say if you're picking processes, you have to be sure of the commitment of the team. Around process stability, I mentioned that the finance process had been leaned, and we've been thinking about that and whether we feel we need to lean every process. And I think it was one of the individuals on the finance team remarked that it was far more important for the process to be stable than to be leaned. I think it's good advice. to lean a process may actually delay you, but if you can automate even a stable process, you're saving immediately. So look, we're figuring this one out ourselves at the moment, but certainly we'd be going for stability in the first instance. Quite important too to retain human knowledge and not forget about how the process should run once you hand it over to the robot. We do need to have subject matter experts still in place for the day that something changes or we have some reason that we have to step back and do this manually. I think so it's quite important to retain the human knowledge on that. Also to engage ICT from the outset. If it isn't an ICT function who's running RPA, for account creation, for server delivery, for any amount of reasons, they have to be engaged right from the outset so that they're confident in what you're doing. Because it can be a scary click of a button to hand over a process in SAP to a non-human. So I think, to be fair to ICT and those system owners, they need to be confident about the system as well. Something that we're going to do ourselves is to get a validation of benefits and savings for all of the processes that we automate. I think that will help to when we seek further investment in whether it's technology or resources to build out that capability internally. So I think just to have that, I won't say external validation, but if we can have validation from even a finance perspective on what we're doing and just keep us on track. And then to seek feedback. In both cases, we've gone back to the system owners, the subject matter experts, and sought their feedback. Lucy mentioned earlier on too about no jobs being lost, and that was freeing up staff to engage in more productive work. That has been echoed to us from those two departments that we worked with. This was work that was tedious. It wasn't what they trained to do, and the fact that they could hand that over to what they call a virtual assistant has certainly allowed them to focus on far more productive work that our organisation would like them to do. So I think at that point I'm finished, and I'll hand it back to yourself, Philip.
Thanks a million, Kevin. We're going to hand over now to Derek, who's going to take us through the procurement framework and tell people exactly how you can access robotic process automation licenses and services from our approved partner, Deloitte. So, Derek, you should be live now.
Hey, Philip, thanks very much. Thanks, Kevin, for your presentation. I said very, very informative, and I suppose for ourselves as having established the framework to see that the plan that we set in place to provide a quick drawdown methodology and a robust selection of robotic process automation vendors has started to bear fruit at this critical time for all of us. So I'm not going to keep you long. I'm only going to talk to you for approximately 10 minutes just to talk to you as to how you can draw down the services of the robotic process automation framework. So there was a robust design journey that we had to go on robotic process automation. Effectively, trying to get this framework over the line with Philip and John was akin to running the national, I should say, without a horse. And we had to conspire together in a lot of ways to get over, under, and around the various obstacles that were thrown at us in the course of trying to develop this framework. We consulted the market and the market providers in December 2018, and 12 of them responded and gave us their views on the market, where it was going, and responded to our questions. We then compiled a report and we issued it to the sourcing team and Deeper, and we talked to the Deeper RPA pilot clients to see, what they could add, what we could learn from them to set up a framework that would satisfy all of the public service, all of the civil service. It's no feat to try and design a framework that will a one-size-fits-all. Once we had done that, we felt we had a really good procurement strategy formulated for what we would look for this framework to deliver. And there was 4 key service requirements that we identified. That we would need the supply, renewal and installation of RPA licenses for both attended and unattended robots. That we would need the provision of RPA training and development to all civil and public sector staff. That we would need specific RPA software vendor support to give us the expert technical support we would need for each of the software vendors that were out there. I should point out that at the time of this framework development, there were 29 separate RPA vendors selling software with no standards across each of the RPA vendors. They were all unique. So imagine having 29 individual Microsoft Office type packages out in the market and trying to choose which is the best one for the Irish Public and Civil Service. Lastly, we wanted the provision of RPA and RPA-related consultancy services, so that, as Kevin has alluded to, when you need to get the expert in to help you on your journey or to fill in a blank that you don't currently have in-house, that's when our RPA partner would provide these services. So we set a high framework selection criteria. We set the bar very high, and it may have led to some of the obstacles we had to overcome, but it was necessary because we did want a high standard so that we could roll this out to all of the public and civil service, to HSE, to Garda, to Revenue, to whoever wanted to draw down from it. So the professional ability and staff experience was asked for, and the qualifications, the level of projects being worked on, that was all provided by the tenderers. We needed organizational capacity to deliver on multiple fronts and on concurrent projects at the same time. We asked for a minimum of 3 RPA software vendors to be proposed. This was after we examined the market and we've seen that approximately 85% of the consultants and RPA resellers out there supported approximately 3 vendors. We then asked for previous contract examples so that we could see whoever was going to win this framework award could support small, medium and large scale deployments. And a critical element at the time, which is now no longer an issue for us, is an individual RPA license on an annual basis. When Philip and his colleagues did this as part of the pilot, they literally had to wrestle with the providers to try and get them to move off the fixed 5 license for 3-year model. And that was a mandatory requirement for this framework, that any government sector body or department could purchase 1 license for 1 year and try it out. There was no huge upfront loading on that. We asked for both on-premise, which is in your premises deployment on your equipment, or an off-premise deployment, maybe where some organizations may wish to use a hosted or a cloud environment. And lastly, then, we wanted to recognize accreditation for each software vendor proposed, so that our staff who undertake the RPA journey, who express an interest in deploying RPA, then go on, if they want to be accredited as a software expert in that particular vendor, to give them some self-satisfaction and fulfillment, and to recognize them for the effort they've taken. The quality and award criteria we asked for desirable features, because there was no one RPA vendor that does everything, but they all do some things really, really well. So we looked across the public sector to see what could possibly be wanted, and we came up with a list of desirable features that we requested each of the 3 software vendors to be able to cover in some way, shape or form across all 3. So optical character recognition, being able to read scan files and translate it into text that can be manipulated. As I said earlier, we looked for software licenses that the partner who would win the tender could install the software for us for attended and unattended robots, that they would provide the training and development of all our staff, that they would provide expert technical assistance for each RPA software vendor if we required it, that their systems and their solutions had the highest quality assurance and data protection standards so that the public sector could entrust their data with the organization that was to be successful. We also had framework management clauses built in that allow us to manage the uptake, the promotional activities, and the drawdown from the framework. And the success stories like Kevin Kelly and David Smith, and also the Property Registration Authority, as all the new organizations that have come on board to deploy RPA. We want to see those success stories so we can promote it throughout the public sector. And lastly, we wanted a detailed project management plan from a successful tenderer as to how they were going to do all of this for us very, very cheaply. So then we looked for functionality and features like credential repositories, being able to record your RPA robot at its work. We want visual application modelers, the reuse of certain generic systems that you could drag and drop RPA processes into different processes. We wanted data integration. We wanted the ability for the robot to be able to scrape data off a green screen if needed. So we threw all this out to the market, and we prioritized the marks on the framework to show the market where we were telling them that the marks were, and it was important to us. You see there from looking at it, training and development was highest. It was our #1 priority to make ourselves self-sufficient. And also, if you look at the cost criteria, half the marks for cost were for the 3 levels of training, for beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels of training. The framework outcome then was that we published the RFT and awarded to Deloitte Ireland, and they are the successful framework member to all civil and public service members. And the RPA software vendors that they provided are Blue Prism, a UK company, NICE, an Israeli-based company now located in the US, but a global RPA provider, and UiPath, a Romanian company with a global footprint also. So how do you use the RPA framework? Well, we developed a framework user guide, and we designed the framework in such a way that it's direct drawdown. There are no mini competitions. You get in touch with either Philip, John, Deloitte directly, or the OGP website and go on to the buyer zone. You look for robotic process automation when you're on the buyer zone. You must be a member, so you have to register. Anyone can register once you're in the public sector. And once logged in, you can see all the information relating to our robotic process automation framework, including the pricing. And the pricing varies depending on the vendor that you choose, or you choose in conjunction with discussions with Deloitte or Philip and John. Our framework user guide then is a user manual. It tells you all about what the framework agreement is, how to use it, why it will save you time to use a framework rather than do it on your own, and how does the pricing work. So if you need that robustness to make a business case, it's in the framework user guide. As we said earlier, it's direct drawdown. So what you would do is you would go on to ogp.gov.ie, you would draw down a notification to activate services form, an NASF, which is effectively an order form. And this will effectively be the contract between you and Deloitte. So you will put down into your NASF what you want to do. You will send it to Deloitte. Deloitte will give you an estimate of what's required. There will be costs. And when you have got to the stage where you're happy with the services and the costings provided, you will both sign and you will enter into a contract. The notification to activate services form will simply take, for example, the details of what you're looking for. So a 6-week proof of concept deployment. Maybe you only want RPA licenses, 20 days consultancy, and 7 attendees. You literally type in what it is you were looking to do. You will have to fill out the data protection information for your organization, and you'll need to engage with your data protection officer to do that, so that you both know what data will be processed by your robot. You will then sign a confidentiality agreement, and Deloitte will also sign a data protection agreement with the client body that is drawing down from the framework. as I said, I've gone through this already in terms of if you want to fill in the days of training you want, the number of attendees, software vendor you wish to purchase, whether you want it on or off premises, and the type of consultancy, the number of days. It's working quite well at the moment. It's very straightforward, and most of our clients are writing it as they want it. It doesn't need to be procurement speak. So listen, that's all. That's a quick stop tour of the development of the RPA framework, and to thank Philip and John and Lucy for organising this today, and for all the speakers. I hope we see more public sector bodies starting to draw off it soon. Thank you.
Thanks a million. I'm just going to pass you over to, sorry, we got a bit of feedback there. Hold on. Just need to mute you. Okay, so I'm just going to hand you over to John, who's going to outline some of the services that he provides to public servants in relation to RPA, and then we'll get into, we have a few questions and answers there, so we can answer them. If people want to stay on for a little bit longer, if you have to go, obviously you have to go. But okay, John.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. If the rest of the presentation today has sparked your interest in adopting RPA, and the best way to get in touch with us is to use that email address there. When you email me, I will call you back and get in touch, and I will act as an initial sounding board. And if we think it's a runner, I can arrange a meeting with Deloitte. And initially, those meetings tend to be free. We will explore the process with you at a high level, and if there's no great barriers, Deloitte will then put a business proposal, and then you can get involved with the NASF, as Derek explained. I can also put you in touch with other civil and public service organisations who've already adopted RPA, so you can get further assurance about whether or not your idea is a runner. There's more information there at that website, RPA information, and also we have a forum on the OPS 2020 site, and you can get involved with there as well. So there's no barriers to get in touch with us. There's no barriers to getting you the information that you need, and we're a fairly friendly bunch to deal with. So I'll just hand you back to Philip.
Great, thanks, John. Okay, I'm just going to go through. We have a couple of questions here, and we have one that person is asked to be anonymous, so that's fair enough. And the question's actually it's probably one that each organisation will face. If you're going to automate a particular process, I suppose the question here is, how do you gather the data in regard to the baseline? So prior to automation, you want to know, how long it is taking for a particular individual or a team to execute a process, and how do you do that, I suppose, without making managers or staff feel uncomfortable? So I don't know if Kevin or David have encountered this.
Kevin here, I can maybe just talk about our processes. Well, in the case of the finance one, it had already been leaned. So they had fairly detailed knowledge of the cost of the process from that exercise. From the HR perspective, I think they had done some analysis themselves because of the increased workload that was coming at them, and they were trying to estimate. So they had done calculations around what they could do within the current resource count to try and anticipate how many more resources they needed. But I don't think you mentioned there, I think in the question, where you didn't want to put off or scare the team itself. But I think the team themselves are the ones going to have to be doing the measurement with you. They're the ones actually doing the job. And I think, going back to something I said about working with the willing, if they can measure what they do, and they're the ones who know best what they do, then I suppose they'll have better sight of the benefits to their own team down the road when the automation is complete. So I'd say just work with the team. Don't feel like you're doing anything to them.
I'd echo an awful lot of that as well. Whenever we're in a situation, we actually have a reporting team, so they do have an awful lot of stats we're able to draw down on. But we did have to go to teams directly as well and get an idea. But luckily, a lot of the teams were under a lot of pressure, so they were quite glad, to be honest, to be able to find some way to be able to assist them.
Okay. Derek, a question for you here from Karen. How often has the RPA framework been used so far? How many organizations do we know? Hold on, we just unmuted you there.
Yeah, we only launched it signed the contract last August, and so far we've had 14 drawdowns from the framework. Some of that ranges from public sector bodies who have renewed licenses. Some of it has been discussions around training and development of staff. So what got in the way of some of that actually was the COVID-19 outbreak. So we'll be looking maybe at delivering some of those trainings with Louise in a different format than was initially intended. And then the likes of Kevin and his projects, and I know there's a few in the offering in social protection and PAS as well. So that's where we are at the moment.
Okay. Alan is asking, is there a template for making a business case for RPA for evaluation by ourselves before getting Deloitte involved? John, I know we certainly have a suitability sort of a document, isn't it? That you...
Yes, it's a very small. Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's a very small document that just basically outlines: is the process digital? Is it stable? There's one or two other criteria as well. It's like and it allows you to kind of at a very high level sketch it out, so that you and the other subject matter experts in your organization can have a good think about that process, and then get in touch with me, and then I get in touch with Deloitte, and then we really examine the process for you before you need to make a move. So don't worry about making a mistake. We will catch you long before you make a mistake.
Yeah, and I think just to bring in Deloitte there, the guys in Deloitte have been fantastic in terms of they're very happy to meet with public service organisations and to talk about their processes. Without the clock doesn't start ticking until people draw down from the NASF. So, Louise, I don't know if you want to speak to that there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the key message. Come and have a conversation with us. We'll help you figure out how much, in theory, this could cost or how hard this might be to automate, and you can weigh up the benefit, in essence, against the cost of doing it. I think at a very base level, though, what you're looking at is how heavy is this process? How long does it take your team to do? Potentially, how long might it take you to automate it? And that's probably the bit where most of the public sector colleagues we've worked with so far are just unsure because they haven't done this before, but you'd be weighing that up as well with the cost of licensing as well. So they're the main component parts. So we're happy to talk you through that. Just give us a shout. Even if it's a conversation on the phone, we're happy to at least even give you some idea. Are you talking a 4-week project? Are you talking a 2-year project? I know it helps to have a ballpark to help progress those discussions. So.
And just while we have you there, Catherine has asked, security has been mentioned. So to Tim or Louise, has there been any issues with GDPR and around data sharing across sections or departments for an automation, especially whether the citizen may be involved?
I might speak to that first and let Tim continue, but what we're generally doing is using remote access onto public service systems. So we never take data off your servers or off your machines. And that's what we've done with the HSC. That's what we're setting up with the DSP at the moment. All the information stays within the public sector organization. We remote in to do any work on your machine. So typically as well, normally the robot will be improving your position in terms of access to data as well. Where previously you might have your team, people on the ground with eyes on personal information, you're now moving to a scenario where you could have that fully automated and actually improve your position from a data protection perspective. But at a base level, we never take any information out of the public sector. Tim, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think you're covering most of it there, Louise. I think another point is, one of the problems is if a robot gets memory. What you want to avoid typically with GDPR is that the robot contains information that it's seen, and we need to secure that in some place. And we have 2 measures against it. One is to actually make sure that what the robot remembers is kept safe, and we can do that. And the other option is to say, well, how about the robot doesn't remember anything? So we can actually we can customize that memory and make sure that the robot sees things and forgets instantly afterwards if needed.
Okay, just a question here from Farah, and Farah indicates that in her organisation, processes change frequently. How much time will need to be dedicated to reprogramming the robot to account for changes? So I don't know if David or Kevin or Tim.
Yeah, well, I guess like we would have experienced like that as well. So it depends how complex change is. So if it's a very complex change, I'd probably be asking, is that the right process to be automating? Because why is it changing so constantly? Is there anything that could be done maybe to make the process more robust first? Or if it's because if legislation change or something like that, well then of course there's nothing that can be done about it. But it would literally all depend on how complex change is. If all it is changing wording or sending it to a different location, yeah, that's no problem at all. But if you're changing which order it's done in, or you have to add new sections into the middle of it, it could be quite time consuming.
Okay. Liam,
just to add to that, Philip, I think one of the points is also often what is seen as process change could be a dependency that can essentially be moved out of the robot. So if what changes is the data that the robot handles, often you can say, well, we don't want the robot to know particular data points. We want it, as soon as it starts processing, to get that data from somewhere else, so that we can make sure that when those changes happen, it's not necessarily something that has to be a change in the robot.
Okay. Sorry. So Liam wants to know, is there capacity centrally and in Deloitte to handle multiple requests at the moment? So I would imagine, and I know Louise and Tim are under an awful lot of pressure at the moment, but is there capacity there to facilitate requests at the moment?
Yeah.
No, simple answer. Fair enough. And I can tell you, certainly from our perspective, Liam, yeah, we're always happy to take queries and
maybe to reiterate that a little bit, Tim, obviously we have a local team, but we also have our global network as well that we can help. And particularly now, I suppose our fear over the last few weeks is people might pull back from these projects because of the challenges of working remotely. But we've kicked off several projects over the last few weeks, both with the public sector and the private sector, in terms of doing the initial engagement virtually and then also the delivery of projects as well. So we have the ability to scale our team quite quickly if it's needed, but equally we're seeing that our clients are scaling their ability to engage with us as well. So yeah, I think people are accelerating, to be honest, on their path towards automation, because rather than the opposite. So
I'm conscious of time. There's another couple of questions here. In terms of processes chosen by Kevin and David, had these processes been mapped out already, or was this part of the RPA rollout? And secondly, how much of the staff or subject matter expert time had to be taken up in order to get these processes automated?
Well, from the NSO perspective, all actually our process already had process maps there, which of course was a great benefit and saved us an awful lot of time. But regarding using subject matter experts, so we use subject matter experts over in 3 phases. The first one would be to take a detailed screenshot guide of the process itself to ensure that that's mapped out so we know what we're building. Then we'd also then use subject matter experts when we're developing it to tell us what exceptions are being used, and then finally to verify output reports, whether it be on a test system or a live system. Of course, generally test systems first. So it can be broken up into different stages, but once again, it really does depend on how complex the process is. So you guys would know much better yourselves how long it would take a detailed screenshot guide of the process. Then, as it's being developed, that part wouldn't be too much time because the team would be going back to the subject matter experts from time to time. That wouldn't be hugely time consuming. But the large amount of time would be how long it would take for the teams, in our perspective anyway, to be able to verify that what was done correctly.
If I can just add something, when David mentioned about the existing process maps, those maps are never detailed enough for robotics needs. We need to go into much deeper, and something very simple like logging in to the system where your process on your existing process map, it will be as a one step. For us, it's opening the system, it's populating your username, it's going to the password field, it's populating the password and clicking OK. So this is the difference, basically.
Okay, question here from Keith, who says, everyone is saying that you don't lose jobs with RPA, but Kevin Kelly said that RPA saved employing 4 people. So how do you square that? I certainly know from a deeper perspective anyway, there's a commitment not to, I suppose, there's a commitment against redundancies. And I suppose arresting employee growth, certainly from our perspective, is different than eliminating posts. But I don't know if anyone else has a perspective on that.
I can only echo what that chap in the Bank of Ireland we used to deal with said, that initially the Bank of Ireland thought that the robots were going to get rid of people, and they've since found out that is not the case.
Yeah, I think it's the notion of moving people to more valuable work or moving them within your organisation to focus on.
Yeah, Philip, Kevin here, just to pick up on that. Yeah, and it's a fair point. There are going to be increased volumes of transactions through that department, and they no longer need to go out and get 4 new people. But I don't have a team to develop automation, so I'm going to be recruiting people or finding people somewhere. So and that's not to say that we'd be hiring the same amount of people, but Mary will tell you that she would have even been under pressure with that additional 4 people doing that mundane work. Her staff are now happy; they're doing far more productive work. So it swings around.
And that's even, I know from team, that's if you'd be given the extra allocation. Just because the task requires 4 days doesn't mean you're going to 4 people, doesn't mean you're going to get 4 members of staff. It just might mean an extra backlog is created.
I think as well, there's probably a critical point that a lot of the public sector people we've been talking to or have focused on, which is this will help you deal with peaks and troughs of demand or deal with massive backlogs that you're trying to already address. There is more than enough work, and probably far more than the teams on the ground can deal with. I suppose what this lets them do is get back on top of some of those challenges, but also manage if there's a spike in demand. For example, with the Garda vetting challenge, they went from volumes of about 400 a week up to 800-900 a week coming through for vetting, and the team on the ground needed support, and I suppose this has given them that option. It's certainly not threatening that they need to be involved in the exceptional cases and the more challenging cases, but it's helping them stay on top of that demand at a time of crisis. That's sort of been key as well.
And I see Irene, our RPA manager over in the Revenue Commissioner, makes the point that there's always plenty of work and there's always demands on the public service. So it's not as if we're going to run out of work anytime soon.
Philip, can I just add to that for me? Just I think we need to bear in mind that there has been an explosion in employment in the public service in the last 4 years. Like in the civil service alone now, we've gone up from mid-30s to 41,500 civil service. And in the public service, we've gone over from 280 plus to 335,000 now. So in the last 4 years, we've had an explosion of staffing. So I suppose our aim would be, in terms of robotic process automation, would be to hold on to staff and give them more valuable jobs, because the services that we're providing are always increasing as our population increases and our businesses increase. But the idea would be the kind of increases that we've had in staffing have not been sustainable. So our aim would be to give people more value-added jobs, and as I suppose we've made a commitment that we will employ people in higher value-added positions. But I think, Philip, we're probably near the end of this.
Yeah.
Down on people, I'd say people are dropping off, so we might maybe close very soon, if not now.
Yeah, I think we will. To people that we didn't get around to your questions, either myself or John will get back to you directly. And we want to thank everyone, and particularly our speakers today, for participating. And as we say, please feel free to get in touch with myself or John in the first instance if RPA is something that you think you would like to engage with. And on behalf of the department, we'd like to say thanks very much for engaging with us today, and best of luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much to all. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.